This is a true story. It doesn't feel like it sometimes, given the sheer scale of it all, but every moment I'm about to share with you is something that I lived, something that was done to me, and something I had to finish. The award felt heavier than it looked, a solid shard of lead crystal resting on the velvet-draped table beside the podium. We were in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, a place where success was measured in the carat weight of the jewelry and the hushed tones of the conversations. They were all there, my daughter, my grandkids, the partners at my firm, to see me, Arthur Vance, accept the Architectural Guild's Lifetime Achievement Award. But as I stood up, my acceptance speech tucked neatly in my breast pocket, Marcus Thorne intercepted me at the microphone, his hand clamping down on my shoulder with a predator's smile. "Allow me, Arthur," he boomed to the silent crowd, his voice dripping with false reverence. "Before the man of the hour speaks, I have a small announcement that puts his incredible legacy into a new perspective." He then looked directly at me, his eyes two chips of ice, and revealed not only that he had just executed a hostile takeover of the firm I had built from the ground up for 45 years, but that he had done it using a secret my late wife, Eleanor, had carried to her grave, a secret he now twisted into a weapon to destroy us both. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The world seemed to warp in that moment, the clinking of champagne glasses and polite murmurs melting into a low, droning hum in my ears. Marcus Thorne. His name was a monument to new money, a tech billionaire who had descended upon San Francisco like a golden plague, buying up skylines and souls with equal, dispassionate efficiency. He was all sharp angles and tailored suits, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He looked like a man who had never once in his life wondered where his next meal was coming from, or if the person he loved would make it through the night. He was, in short, everything I wasn't. My firm, Vance & Sterling, was my life's work. We didn't build glass and steel monstrosities that pricked the sky with arrogant indifference. We built hospitals that felt like homes, libraries that felt like sanctuaries, and community centers that felt like the heart of a neighborhood. We used brick and reclaimed wood and natural light. Our work had a soul because Eleanor, my wife of 42 years, had insisted on it. "A building without warmth is just a box, Arthur," she used to say, her fingers tracing over my blueprints. "Don't just build boxes." A year ago, I had buried her. I had held her hand as the cancer finally won, and a part of me had been buried with her in that quiet plot overlooking the bay. I was 68 years old. My joints ached in the morning, my hair was more salt than pepper, and my idea of a wild night was falling asleep in my armchair with a history book on my lap. I was semi-retired, content to let my hand-picked successor, a brilliant young architect named Liam Peterson, steer the ship. Liam was hungry, ambitious, and I saw a younger version of myself in him. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. Thorne had entered our orbit 6 months before the disastrous night at the Fairmont. He'd come to us with a proposition, a partnership. He wanted to fund a new philanthropic wing of Vance & Sterling, dedicated to sustainable urban housing. He called it the Eleanor Vance Project. He used her name. He stood in my office, a space filled with photos of her, and spoke of honoring her legacy. He was charming, persuasive, and had a 9-figure checkbook. Liam was ecstatic. "This is it, Arthur," he'd said, his eyes gleaming. "This puts us on another level. This is Thorne's world now, and he wants us to be a part of it." Against my better judgment, a little voice of old-world caution that I foolishly silenced, I agreed. I trusted Liam's enthusiasm. I wanted to believe that Eleanor's name could still be a force for good in the world. Thorne became a regular presence. He'd walk through our studio in Soma, complimenting junior architects, asking insightful questions about load-bearing walls and light refraction. He was a chameleon, perfectly mimicking the language of our world. He took Liam under his wing, inviting him to exclusive dinners at Quince and weekend trips to his Napa estate. I watched from a distance, feeling like a relic. I was the firm's history, its foundation. But Liam and Thorne? They were its future. Now, standing at that podium, the warmth of the spotlight feeling like an interrogation lamp, I understood the totality of the deception. Thorne's speech was a masterpiece of corporate cruelty. He explained how a majority of my partners, wooed by his promises and intimidated by his power, had sold their shares to his holding company. He announced that Liam Peterson would be the new CEO of the rebranded Thorne-Built Designs. My name, Sterling's name, was to be erased. Then, he delivered the killing blow. Arthur Vance is a man of secrets, Thorne said, his voice now low and conspiratorial, drawing the audience in. He built a reputation on integrity, but he hid a deep and troubling instability at the very heart of his own home. He paused for effect. My daughter, Sarah, started to rise from her seat, her face pale with fury. I gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not here. Not now. His wife, Eleanor, Thorne continued, was a brilliant woman. But she was also a fragile one. She suffered from crippling bouts of depression, a fact Arthur went to great lengths to conceal. He built a fortress around her, not of love, but of shame. It was a grotesque distortion of the truth. Eleanor had fought depression her entire life, yes. But she fought it with a courage that humbled me every single day. Our life wasn't a prison, it was a partnership. I was her anchor, and she was my light. We had faced it together. This firm, Thorne declared, gesturing to the room, was his real wife. The one he could control. The one that wasn't flawed. He let the ugly word hang in the air. He had taken her struggle, our struggle, and twisted it into a narrative of my weakness and her shame. He wasn't just taking my company, he was desecrating my wife's memory for sport, to make his victory more absolute. He was salting the earth of my entire life. I don't remember walking off that stage. I remember the looks. Pity. Confusion. A few with a flicker of morbid curiosity. The faces of friends and colleagues I had known for decades now seemed like masks I couldn't read. My daughter and her husband rushed to my side, shielding me as they led me out through a side exit, away from the buzz of whispers that now filled the grand ballroom. We got into the back of their car, and as we drove through the glittering streets of the city I had helped to build, I felt nothing. It was a terrifying, hollow void. The shock was a shroud, protecting me from the pain that was sure to come. For 45 years, I had been an architect. I designed things to last, buildings of brick and steel, a reputation of integrity, a family built on love. And in the space of 10 minutes, a man with a serpent's tongue and a bottomless bank account had demolished it all. The car sped across the Golden Gate Bridge, its majestic, soaring lines a bitter irony. It was a structure I had studied and revered my entire life, a testament to enduring strength. Tonight, I felt as fragile as a house of cards in a hurricane. And the storm had only just begun. I spent the next 3 days in a fog. I didn't answer the phone, which rang incessantly with calls from reporters, concerned friends, and undoubtedly, lawyers. I sat in the Eames chair in my living room in Sausalito, the one Eleanor had bought me for my 50th birthday, and stared out at the bay. The house, once a sanctuary of shared memories, now felt like a mausoleum. Every photograph on the wall, every book on the shelf, was a reminder of what Thorne had defiled. He hadn't just stolen my company. He had reached back in time and poisoned my past. The grief I felt was different from the grief of losing Eleanor. That had been a clean, honest pain, a testament to our love. This was a dirty, corrosive thing, a violation. My daughter, Sarah, tried to break through the wall of my silence. She brought me food I didn't eat and spoke in soft, reassuring tones I barely heard. "Dad, we can fight this," she'd say. "There are laws. He can't just spread lies like that." But I knew better. Men like Thorne didn't operate within the same set of rules as the rest of us. They wrote their own. Their power was a gravitational force, bending reality around them. On the 4th day, a courier delivered a box to my front door. It was from the firm. Inside, neatly packed, were the contents of my office, my family photos, my favorite fountain pen, a collection of architectural models I'd built over the years. At the very top was a single sheet of paper. It was a formal notice of termination, effective immediately, citing a newly enacted change of leadership clause in the corporate bylaws. It was signed by Liam Peterson. Seeing his signature on that paper was like a knife twist in an open wound. It was a final, intimate betrayal that somehow hurt more than Thorne's public spectacle. I had mentored Liam. I had championed him, celebrated his successes as if they were my own. I had trusted him with my legacy. That letter was the first crack in the numbness. It let the anger in. A slow, hot burn that started in my chest and spread through my veins. This wasn't just a business transaction. This was personal. Thorne hadn't just acquired assets, he had targeted my life, my love, my very identity. And Liam. Liam had held the door open for him. My suspicion, once ignited, became a fire. I started in my home office, a room I hadn't used much since I'd stepped back from the firm. I powered up my old desktop computer, a machine I preferred to the sleek, impenetrable laptops the firm now used. I began to sift through years of digital correspondence, searching for any mention of Thorne before his official proposal. For hours, I found nothing. It was all polite, professional, and infuriatingly normal. I was about to give up, to dismiss it as a dead end, when I remembered the old server backups. Before the firm had moved everything to the cloud, we'd kept physical hard drive backups in a fireproof safe. I had one here, a relic from about a year and a half ago. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. It took me another day to find the right cables and coax the old drive to life. The interface was clunky, the files disorganized. I felt like an archaeologist digging through the ruins of a lost civilization. I targeted Liam's archived email folder. I typed Thorne into the search bar. The first few hits were just news articles he'd forwarded to colleagues, pieces about Thorne's latest tech venture or philanthropic donation. But then I saw it. A thread with a subject line that made my blood run cold, Project Foundation. The first email was from Liam to a private, encrypted address, dated 18 months ago, a full year before Thorne had ever approached our firm. It was an introduction. Liam wrote that he was an admirer of Mr. Thorne's disruptive approach to legacy industries and that he believed Vance and Sterling was ripe for strategic realignment. He was pitching the betrayal of his own company. My company. I read on, my hands trembling. The thread was a meticulous chronicle of corporate espionage. Liam had been feeding Thorne information for over a year. He sent him internal financial reports, highlighting our most profitable projects and our hidden vulnerabilities. He sent him personality profiles of the senior partners, detailing their ambitions, their grievances, their price points. He was the architect of our downfall. Thorne wasn't the conqueror, he was just the moneyman. Liam was the traitor. The worst of it came at the end of the thread. A final email from Liam, sent just 2 months after Eleanor had died. Thorne's encrypted address had asked, "I need a vulnerability. Something personal. Something to break his spirit if he resists." Liam's reply was short and devastating. He wrote about Eleanor's depression. He detailed my fierce protection of her privacy, framing it not as love but as control. He gave Thorne the exact words, the precise narrative, to twist our private pain into a public spectacle of shame. He had handed Thorne the weapon, knowing full well how he would use it. He had sold my wife's memory for a seat at the head of the table. I closed the laptop, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The grief, the anger, the shock, it all coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. They thought I was a relic. A sentimental old man to be swept aside. They thought that by taking my firm and soiling my past, they had won. They thought I was broken. But an architect knows something that corporate raiders and tech billionaires don't. An architect knows that before you can build something new, you sometimes have to tear the old structure down to the studs. And as I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of my life, I began to draw up a new set of blueprints. Not for a building of steel and glass, but for a demolition. The next morning, I drove into the city. The familiar skyline of San Francisco, a view that had always filled me with a quiet sense of pride, now looked like a monument to my own foolishness. Each building I'd had a hand in designing felt like a tombstone. I parked in front of the monolithic glass tower that housed what was once Vance and Sterling. The name was already gone, replaced by a cold, silver plaque that read Thorn-Built Designs. A security guard, a man I didn't recognize, stepped forward as I approached the entrance. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "I'm Arthur Vance," I said, my voice steady. His eyes flickered with a brief moment of recognition, quickly replaced by a practiced neutrality. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance. Your access has been revoked. I can't let you in." "I just need to speak with Liam Peterson," I said. "Mr. Peterson is in a meeting. He's left strict instructions that he's not to be disturbed." Of course, he had. I looked past the guard, through the soaring glass lobby, and saw him. Liam. He was standing with Marcus Thorne and a group of men in expensive suits, all of them laughing. Liam was gesturing towards a large architectural model of a new skyscraper, his posture confident, expansive. He looked like a king in his new court. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second. There was no remorse in his expression, no guilt. Just a flicker of annoyance, quickly masked by a smug, dismissive smile before he turned back to his audience. He was untouchable, and he knew it. That single, fleeting look told me everything. A direct confrontation would be useless. It would be like a moth throwing itself against the searchlight. My next stop was the law offices of Harding, Shaw and Finch, the firm that had represented Vance and Sterling for over 30 years. Frank Harding had been a friend. We'd played golf together, our families had shared holidays. I walked into their opulent lobby on the 40th floor of the Transamerica Pyramid, a space designed to communicate power and permanence, and asked to see him. The receptionist, a young woman who looked at me with an uncomfortable mix of pity and fear, informed me that Mr. Harding was unavailable. In fact, the entire firm could no longer represent me due to a conflict of interest. Thorne had them on retainer now. He hadn't just bought my company, he'd bought my legal protection, my history, my friendships. He had isolated me completely. The official assault began a week later. A courier delivered a thick, foreboding envelope. It was a cease and desist letter from Thorne's legal team at Skadden, ARPs, a firm known for its corporate sharks. The letter was a work of art, a symphony of veiled threats and legal jargon. It accused me of potential slander and libel for disseminating false and malicious narratives about the corporate restructuring. It warned me that any attempt to contact former employees, partners, or clients of the firm would be met with swift and aggressive legal action. It was a gag order, designed to terrify me into silence. And attached to it was a preliminary injunction, a legal wall built around my own life's work, making me a trespasser in my own past. They were daring me to fight, knowing I no longer had the resources or the allies to do so. The media campaign followed, precise and devastating. An interview with Marcus Thorne appeared in the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "Tech visionary Marcus Thorne rescues stagnant architectural firm from out-of-touch founder." In the article, Thorne painted a picture of Vance and Sterling as a once great institution that had been slowly fossilizing under my antiquated leadership. He used words like inefficiency and resistance to innovation. Anonymous sources, undoubtedly Liam and the other partners who had betrayed me, were quoted lamenting my emotional decision-making and my inability to adapt to a changing market. The story about Eleanor was subtly woven in, not as a direct accusation, but as a tragic backdrop. They framed me as a man so consumed by personal grief that he'd let his professional empire crumble. It was brilliant. It was vicious. And it was working. I was no longer Arthur Vance, celebrated architect. I was a cautionary tale, a foolish old man who couldn't let go. Thorne, meanwhile, was everywhere. He was on the cover of Forbes, lauded as a modern-day Medici, a patron of the arts and architecture. He hosted a lavish party at his Pacific Heights mansion to celebrate the acquisition, a glittering affair attended by the mayor, tech CEOs, and socialites. Photos from the event were splashed across society pages, Thorne, with Liam at his side, raising a glass of champagne, the very picture of triumph. They were celebrating on the grave of my company, and the entire city was applauding them for it. I felt like I was drowning. The weight of Thorne's power was suffocating. He controlled the money, the law, the narrative. He had an army of lawyers, a PR machine, and the momentum of public opinion on his side. I was one man. An old man. My reputation was in tatters, my resources were finite, and my spirit was worn thin. For a few dark days, I considered just letting it go. Selling my house, moving somewhere quiet, and living out my remaining years in obscurity. Let him have his victory. What could I possibly do? He was a god on a mountain of money, and I was just a man. It was in that moment of absolute despair, when the last embers of my fighting spirit were about to die out, that I finally decided to visit Eleanor. The San Francisco Columbarium is one of the city's hidden treasures, a quiet, neoclassical rotunda where the city's dead rest in small, ornate niches. It's a peaceful, solemn place, a library of lives. Eleanor had loved it. She'd found it comforting, a place of beauty and remembrance rather than sorrow. Her niche was on the second floor, bathed in the soft light filtering through a stained glass window. I stood before it, my hand resting on the cool marble plaque bearing her name. For the first time since that night at the Fairmont, I let myself truly weep. I wept for her, for us, for the life we had built and the legacy that was being so cruelly erased. I talked to her, my voice a hoarse whisper in the silent hall. I told her I was tired. I told her I didn't know if I had the strength to fight. I told her I was sorry, that I had failed to protect her memory. As I stood there, lost in my grief, I remembered something. A box. In the back of my closet at home, there was a small, lacquered box where Eleanor kept things that were important to her, old letters, photographs, a lock of Sarah's hair from her first haircut. I hadn't been able to bring myself to open it since she died. It felt too final. But now, a sudden, inexplicable urge pulled at me. I needed to see it. I drove home, my mind singularly focused. I found the box, its polished surface cool to the touch. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among the faded photographs and mementos, was a stack of letters tied with a silk ribbon. There were the letters I had written to her during our first year of marriage, when my work on a project in Chicago had kept us apart for months. And underneath them, there was one letter addressed to me, in her familiar, elegant script. I had never seen it before. The envelope simply said, "For Arthur, when you need it most." My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. The letter was dated a few months before she passed away, written at a time when she knew her fight was coming to an end. "My dearest Arthur," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you are feeling lost. I know you. I know how you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, how you feel responsible for protecting everyone and everything you love. But I need you to remember something, my brilliant, stubborn architect. Your greatest strength is not in the buildings you design, but in your vision. You see the world not just as it is, but as it should be. You see the hidden structures, the load-bearing truths that hold everything up. Do not let sorrow be the end of your story. Do not let anyone else define the world you live in. You are a builder. You have built a life of integrity, a family of love, and a legacy of beauty. But sometimes, a builder must also be a demolitions expert. Sometimes, you have to clear the rot to make way for something true. Don't be afraid to be relentless. Don't be afraid to fight for the foundation you laid. Build me one last thing, my love. Build a testament to the truth. I will be with you, in every line you draw." I read the letter 3 times, the tears blurring her words. The fog of despair that had enveloped me for weeks began to recede, burned away by a sudden, brilliant flash of purpose. She had known. Somehow, she had known I would need this. Her words were a blueprint. He had attacked my foundation. He had desecrated our truth. And now, I would clear the rot. The grief remained, but it had changed its shape. It was no longer a weight pulling me down, it was fuel. The anger was no longer a blind rage, it was a cold, sharp tool. Marcus Thorne and Liam Peterson thought they had beaten a weak old man. They had underestimated their enemy. They thought my age was a liability, that my sentimentality was a flaw. They were about to learn that there is nothing more dangerous than a man who has already lost everything he loves. At 68 years old, I was done being a victim. I was going back to work. I was going to design their ruin. My first call was not to a powerful, expensive law firm. It was to a name I'd gotten from an old friend on the city's Historic Preservation Committee, a man who loathed the kind of soulless towers Thorne was building. He described her as a legal pit bull with a conscience. Her name was Isabel Rossi. She was a solo practitioner with a small, unassuming office in a converted warehouse in the Dogpatch neighborhood. She was 35, sharp-eyed, and wore a leather jacket over a simple black dress. Her office wasn't filled with mahogany and leather, but with filing cabinets, law books, and the distinct hum of a powerful coffee machine. I sat across from her at a simple steel desk and told her everything. I laid out the whole story, from Thorne's initial charm offensive to the final, devastating betrayal documented in Liam's emails. I didn't hold back my anger or my grief. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick. Isabel leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. She tapped a pen against the yellow legal pad, her gaze fixed on me. "Mr. Vance," she said finally, her voice calm and direct. "What you've described is a masterpiece of corporate predation. Thorne has insulated himself perfectly. He used your own partners and your chosen successor to create an ironclad, legal basis for the takeover. The slander case regarding your wife is horrific, but it's a he said, she said that would be nearly impossible to win in court. His lawyers would bury us in motions and bleed you dry. Financially, legally, and publicly, he holds all the cards." "I know that," I said. "I'm not here to sue him for money or to get my old job back. I don't care about that anymore." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Then what do you want, Mr. Vance?" "I want to dismantle him," I said, the words feeling solid and real as I spoke them. "I want to take away the one thing he truly loves, his power. I want to turn his empire to dust. I'm not looking for a lawyer to file a lawsuit. I'm looking for a partner to plan a war. Thorne and Liam see me as a relic. They think I'm weak. That's going to be our greatest weapon. They won't see us coming." A slow smile spread across Isabel's face. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks, and it was predatory. "Mr. Vance," she said, leaning forward and extending her hand. "I think we're going to get along just fine. Our strategy was simple. We would not fight Thorne on his battlefield. We would not engage in a public relations war or a costly legal battle over the takeover. We would attack his foundation. Like any poorly constructed building, Thorne's empire looked impressive from the outside, but I was willing to bet my life that its foundations were rotten. My job was to be the architect, to find the structural flaws. Isabel's job was to be the demolitions expert, to place the charges. I started where I was strongest, with Thorne's new flagship project, the one Liam had been showing off in the lobby. It was a monstrous, 50-story luxury condominium tower called the Apex, set to be built on a prime piece of real estate overlooking the Embarcadero. It was Thorne's monument to himself, a gaudy middle finger to the city's architectural character. I knew from my years on the City Planning Commission that a project of that scale was a labyrinth of permits, inspections, and regulations. It was a place where a man like Thorne, driven by ego and a fast-track timeline, was bound to cut corners. I used my age and my fallen legend status to my advantage. I became a ghost. I spent my days at the San Francisco Public Library, poring over public records, zoning applications, and environmental impact reports for the Apex. I reached out to old contacts, not powerful people, but the ones Thorne would never notice. City clerks, retired construction foremen, grizzled union reps who'd been around for decades. I didn't present myself as a man seeking revenge. I was just an old architect, heartbroken and at loose ends, curious about the city's new developments. They talked. They trusted me. They told me about the impossible construction schedule Thorne was demanding. They whispered about rumors of rushed concrete pours and inspectors being fast-tracked. One name kept coming up, a city building inspector named Frank Miller. I knew Frank. He was a decent man, but he'd had a rough few years, a sick wife, mounting medical bills. He was vulnerable. A man like Thorne would smell that kind of vulnerability a mile away. I didn't approach Frank directly. That would be too risky. Instead, I focused on the materials. Every major construction project has to file material specification reports, detailing the exact grade of steel, the PSI of the concrete, the manufacturer of the fire suppression systems. The reports for the Apex were all perfectly in order, signed off by Frank Miller. But something felt wrong. The primary steel supplier listed was a subsidiary of Thorne's own holding company. It was a classic cost-cutting maneuver, but also a potential point of failure. I called an old friend, a structural engineer named George, who owed me a favor from 20 years back. I asked him to take a quiet, unofficial look at the steel specifications. Just as a professional curiosity, George. 2 days later, he called me back, his voice grim. "Arthur, this is bad," he said. "The specified steel grade is below code for a building of that height in a seismic zone. It would pass a cursory inspection, but a real deep tissue analysis? It would never hold up in a major quake. They're building a 50-story death trap." Bingo. I now had the what. I still needed the how. How did they get it past the inspections? I had to get to Frank Miller. I learned his routine. He ate lunch every day at the same old-school diner in the Mission, a place called St. Francis Fountain. I went there one afternoon and sat at the counter. When Frank came in, I acted surprised. "Frank Miller? My God, it's been years." We made small talk. I told him my sob story, the one the whole city already knew. I let him feel sorry for me. I didn't mention the Apex. I just planted a seed. "It's a shame what's happening to this city, Frank," I said as I was leaving. "Men like Thorne, they don't build things to last. They build them to sell." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. I waited a week, then I had Isabel send a package to Frank's home. It was an anonymous envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a threat. It was a printout of the substandard steel specification report for the Apex, and at the bottom, in red ink, Isabel had simply written, "San Francisco earthquake, 1906. EST fatalities, 3000 plus. 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. Fatalities, 63. What will the number be next time?" We weren't blackmailing him. We were reminding him of the stakes. We were appealing to the public servant he used to be. The next morning, a thick manila envelope appeared on my doorstep. It had been slipped under the door sometime in the night. Inside were photocopies. Inspection logs for the Apex, all pre-signed by Frank. Invoices for a consulting fee paid to his wife from a shell corporation that, with a little digging, Isabel quickly traced back to Thorne. And a personal note from Frank, just 3 words scrawled on a napkin: "He made me." It was everything we needed. We had found the rotten beam in the foundation of his crowning achievement. While I was hunting for structural flaws in Thorne's real estate ambitions, Isabel was digging into the bedrock of his finances. She operated with a digital scalpel, a stark contrast to my analog, shoe-leather approach. She wasn't looking for an army of lawyers. She hired a single, fiercely brilliant forensic accountant, a woman who had once worked for the SEC and had a bloodhound's nose for financial fraud. Together, they began to follow the money. Thorne's wealth was a complex web of holding companies, tech startups, and venture capital funds. On the surface, it was an impenetrable fortress. But Isabel and her accountant weren't looking at the fortress walls, they were examining the plumbing. They analyzed his stock trades, his corporate filings, his charitable donations. They knew that men like Thorne, men driven by an insatiable need for more, always get sloppy. Their greed becomes a pattern, a signature. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, his philanthropy. Thorne made a great show of his charitable giving, donating millions to hospitals, museums, and universities. It was a core part of his public image as a benevolent visionary. But Isabel noticed something odd. A significant portion of the donations from his charitable foundation were being funneled into a single, obscure overseas art fund based in the Cayman Islands. It was a registered nonprofit, but its paper trail was a ghost. "This is it, Arthur," Isabel said, her voice electric with excitement during one of our late-night strategy sessions in her office. We were surrounded by takeout containers and stacks of financial documents. "This is his washing machine. He donates tens of millions of his company's pre-tax profits to his own foundation. The foundation then invests that money in this Cayman Art Fund. The fund buys and sells art between a series of anonymous shell corporations, inflating the value with each transaction. Finally, the clean money is funneled back into Thorne's personal offshore accounts. It's a classic tax evasion and money laundering scheme, dressed up in the respectable clothes of art collecting and philanthropy. It was more than just a scheme, it was a profound vulnerability. Thorne's entire public persona was built on the lie of his generosity. Exposing this would not only bring federal investigators crashing down on his door, but it would shatter the very myth he had so carefully constructed. While Isabel was tracing the flow of money, I was busy gathering an army. I knew I couldn't be the only person Thorne had ruined on his climb to the top. Men like that leave a trail of bodies. I started making quiet inquiries, using the connections I still had. I spoke to a small business owner whose company had been driven into bankruptcy by a predatory deal with Thorne. I met with a brilliant software engineer Thorne had pushed out of her own startup, stealing her intellectual property in the process. I found a journalist who had been fired from his newspaper after Thorne, the paper's biggest advertiser, had pressured the publisher to kill a negative story about him. One by one, I met with them in quiet cafes in North Beach or on park benches in Golden Gate Park. I listened to their stories. I shared my own. I didn't offer them money or false promises of legal victory. I offered them something more valuable, a chance to be heard, and a chance for coordinated, meaningful revenge. We were a quiet coalition of the wronged, a support group that was slowly transforming into a conspiracy. Each one of them had a piece of the puzzle, a damning email, a fraudulent contract, an eyewitness account of Thorne's unethical practices. Alone, their stories were just unfortunate anecdotes. Together, they were a comprehensive indictment of his entire career. Thorne, in his arrogance, remained completely oblivious. He was too busy planning the social event of the year, the Apex inaugural gala. It was to be held at the half-finished skyscraper itself, a decadent celebration of his triumph. Invitations were the most coveted ticket in town. The mayor would be there, senators, the titans of Silicon Valley. It was designed to be his coronation, the moment he cemented his place as the undisputed king of San Francisco. He was so focused on the sky that he never thought to check the ground beneath his feet. As the date of the gala approached, Isabel and I finalized our plan. It was a multi-front assault, designed to detonate simultaneously for maximum impact. We called it Operation Cornerstone. The first charge was for the press. We took our meticulously assembled dossier on the Apex Tower, the substandard steel, the falsified inspection reports, the sworn affidavit from Frank Miller, whom Isabel had convinced to turn state's witness in exchange for immunity, and the testimonies from a dozen construction workers, and gave it to a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, the one journalist in the city we knew Thorne couldn't buy or intimidate. He agreed to run the story, but only if he could verify everything independently. We gave him everything he needed. He promised the story would be front-page news. The second charge was legal. Isabel bundled our evidence of Thorne's financial crimes, the forensic accountant's report on the Cayman Islands Art Fund, the proof of tax evasion and money laundering, into a formal whistleblower submission to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the IRS. She filed it electronically, timed to go live at exactly 7 p.m. on the night of the gala. The third charge was for the city. Our coalition of Thorne's other victims, now organized and represented pro bono by a team of young lawyers Isabel had assembled, would file a coordinated barrage of civil lawsuits at the San Francisco Superior Court first thing in the morning after the gala. The charges would range from intellectual property theft to wrongful termination and breach of contract. It would be a legal death by 1,000 cuts. The final, and perhaps most crucial, element was me. I was the ghost at the feast. My role was simple: to be there. To witness it. To make sure that when his world came crashing down, Marcus Thorne looked up and saw my face. The night of the gala was a classic San Francisco evening, with a thick fog rolling in from the bay, muffling the sounds of the city and wrapping the skyline in a soft, gray shroud. I got dressed in the same tuxedo I had worn to the Fairmont the night my world had been torn apart. Tonight, it felt different. It was no longer the uniform of a victim, it was the armor of a combatant. I didn't have an invitation, of course. But Frank Harding, my old lawyer and friend, the one who had been forced to drop me as a client, had left one for me at the front desk of my building. It was in a plain envelope with a simple, handwritten note, for old time's sake. Give him hell, Arthur. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet signal that Thorne's grip was not as absolute as he believed. I took a taxi to the Embarcadero. The base of the apex tower was a blaze of light, a stark contrast to the foggy darkness around it. Valets in red jackets were rushing to handle a river of luxury cars. Paparazzi flashes strobed against the damp pavement. The elite of San Francisco were arriving, dressed in their finest, eager to pay homage to the city's new king. I walked towards the entrance, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum. I wasn't nervous. I felt a profound and chilling calm, the kind an architect feels when they stand back and watch their design become a reality. I handed my invitation to the security guard. He checked the list, nodded, and unclipped the velvet rope. "Welcome, Mr. Vance." I stepped inside. The lobby was a cavernous space, still raw with exposed concrete and wiring, but transformed for the night with swathes of white fabric, thousands of orchids, and dramatic uplighting. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi, their music nearly drowned out by the chatter of 100 self-important conversations. I took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a position near one of the massive concrete pillars, a place where I could observe without being noticed. And there he was. Marcus Thorne. He was holding court in the center of the room, resplendent in a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. He was laughing, his arm draped around the mayor, a picture of untouchable power and success. Liam was at his side, as always, his face flushed with excitement, soaking in the reflected glory. They were on top of the world, standing inside the very monument to their arrogance and corruption. They had no idea it was about to become their tomb. At exactly 7:30 p.m., just as the mayor was stepping up to a temporary podium to begin his fawning tribute to Thorne, a subtle shift occurred in the room. It started with one person, then another, their eyes glancing down at their phones. A low murmur began to spread, a ripple of digital information cutting through the analog schmoozing. I pulled out my own phone. The lead story on the San Francisco Chronicle's website had just gone live. The headline was stark and brutal: Thorne's Tower of Terror, city's newest skyscraper, seismic catastrophe, whistleblowers and city records allege fraud, bribery. The murmur in the room grew louder. The mayor, sensing the shift in mood, faltered in his speech. Thorne, annoyed by the distraction, shot a dark look at the crowd. His personal assistant rushed to his side, showing him the screen of her phone. I watched his face. The confident, smug mask dissolved in real time. It was a fascinating architectural process, the deconstruction of a man's arrogance. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a pallor of disbelief, then dawning horror, then pure, undiluted rage. Before he could react, the next wave hit. A different set of alerts began to chime on people's phones. This time, from the financial news outlets. SEC freezes assets of Thorne Industries amid investigation into massive financial fraud. Billionaire Marcus Thorne accused of money laundering through charitable foundation. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The string quartet trailed off, one violin squeaking into the void. All eyes were on Marcus Thorne. The king was naked. His investors and business partners, the men who had been slapping him on the back moments before, began to edge away, creating a physical circle of isolation around him. Their phones were now pressed to their ears as they made frantic calls to their brokers and lawyers. The party was over. A full-scale financial panic was erupting right here in this half-finished temple of greed. Liam looked like a ghost, his face a mask of white terror. He looked from Thorne to the fleeing guests and then, his eyes scanned the room in desperation. They found me. I was standing exactly where I had been all along, by the pillar, watching. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just met his gaze. In my eyes, he saw the full and terrible truth of what had just happened. He saw the architect of his ruin. Thorne, however, was made of something else. His fear was quickly being consumed by a volcanic fury. He saw me, too. He shoved his way through the departing crowd, his eyes locked on mine. He was like a wounded bull, charging at the source of his pain. He got within a few feet of me, his face contorted into a mask of rage. You, he spat, his voice a low, venomous hiss. You did this. You miserable old man. I will destroy you. I will bury you in lawsuits until your grandchildren are broke. I took a slow sip of my champagne. You can't, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden stillness. The SEC has frozen all your assets. Your lawyers won't even take your calls in the morning. You have no money, Marcus. And a man like you, with no money, is no one. The truth of my words hit him like a physical blow. His shoulders slumped. The rage flickered, replaced by a dawning, pathetic panic. He looked around the room, at the empire of influence that had evaporated in the space of 15 minutes. He looked at the skyscraper around us, his grand legacy, now a worthless, toxic asset. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in a human being before. The arrogance, the power, the cruelty, it was all gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out man. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands slightly raised in a gesture of supplication. Vance. Arthur, please, he stammered. The great Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, was pleading. Call it off. There must be a deal we can make. Name your price. Anything. Just make it stop. He, the man who had tried to buy and sell my entire world, thought this had a price. He thought he could negotiate his way out of a reckoning. I looked at him, at this broken, begging shell of a man, and I thought of Eleanor. I thought of her courage, her grace, and the memory he had tried to tarnish for profit and sport. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting him drown in it. Then, I leaned in close, so only he could hear. There is no price, I said. This is not a negotiation. This is a demolition. I placed my empty champagne glass on a nearby table, turned my back on him, and walked out of the unfinished building, leaving him alone in the ruins. Months passed. Thorne's empire did not just crumble, it was systematically dismantled by the federal government and a legion of creditors. The apex tower stood as a half-finished skeleton on the waterfront, a monument to his hubris, tangled in lawsuits and city ordinances for years to come. Liam Peterson, facing his own indictments for corporate malfeasance, testified against Thorne in exchange for a lighter sentence. He ended up with 5 years in a low-security federal prison and a lifetime ban from the industry. Marcus Thorne, convicted on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, was sentenced to 25 years to life. He would be an old man before he ever saw the outside of a prison cell, if he ever did. The partners who had betrayed me sold their shares back to me for pennies on the dollar, desperate to distance themselves from the Thorne catastrophe. I reinstated the firm's original name, Vance and Sterling. I didn't do it for nostalgia. I did it because some things are built to last. I rehired many of the old employees who had been let go, and I began the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. I am back in my old office now. It looks much the same. The photos of Eleanor are back on the walls. The architectural models are on the shelves. The afternoon light streams through the windows, just as it always has. The city skyline stretches out before me, a testament to what can be built, what can endure, and what can be torn down. I don't feel triumph, not in the way Thorne would have understood it. There is no thrill in victory. There is only a quiet, somber satisfaction. A sense of balance restored. A foundation made true again. I pick up my favorite fountain pen, its weight familiar and comforting in my hand, and pull a fresh sheet of drafting paper towards me. I still design things to last. The end.